If I had known whom we were about to disturb beneath those stones, I would never have agreed to take part in the excavation. Stonehenge had always seemed like a monument of silence, a perfect balance of time and matter. But that year, the ground beneath it behaved differently. The geophysical scanners registered rhythmic pulses, not random noise, but something organic, deliberate, as if the earth itself was breathing. We drilled deeper, and every strike of the machine echoed through the soil like a slow heartbeat. Instruments failed, data vanished into static, and the air seemed heavier each hour. Then the drill hit something solid, a metallic layer that resisted all tools. The tip melted at 7,000 degrees, but the material remained cold and untouched, reflecting no light, swallowing it entirely, as if it remembered everything that ever touched it. That night, the wind stopped. The mist over the plain thickened, and the temperature dropped sharply. Through the haze, shapes appeared, 4 luminous figures moving without sound. They looked human, but were not. Their bodies were translucent, faintly glowing from within, their eyes like pools of liquid silver. They stood at the edge of the pit, and the air began to vibrate as if filled with invisible electricity. I heard them without hearing words. Thoughts pressed directly into my mind. They said the metal was not of Earth, that it was a wall, not a treasure. Another told me it was meant to contain something alive, something that should never be released. Their presence carried no hostility, only inevitability, as though they had come not to warn us, but to witness what we had already set in motion. When I tried to ask what was inside, the answer came as a sensation, not language, a sudden, blinding chill that spread through my skull. They knew we had already awakened it. The light within their bodies pulsed in rhythm with the vibration of the soil. The ground under Stonehenge trembled faintly. The metal below shimmered once, and a hollow resonance echoed through the valley. They said this vibration meant the prison was stirring. I understood then that they hadn't come from curiosity, but from necessity. What slept beneath those stones had been hidden there long before humanity learned to shape its first tools. After they vanished, the air kept trembling. I stood at the edge of the excavation, watching the metallic surface fade from silver to shadow. It was no longer inert matter. It was reacting to us, to movement, to thought. I could feel it through the soles of my boots, as though it were listening. By dawn, the instruments began to function again, but the readings were impossible. Identical rhythmic spikes, synchronized with human breathing. The pulse beneath the soil matched our own. The ground was no longer still. It throbbed in unison with our hearts. Stonehenge was no longer a monument. It was a mechanism, a lid built to contain a heartbeat that never belonged to Earth. The soil radiated faint warmth, and the metallic echo rose once more through the ground. I realized then that we hadn't discovered history. We had touched something that remembered us before we existed. We thought we had found an artifact. We had found a prison. They said the site was not a sanctuary, but a scar of an ancient war. The air around Stonehenge still vibrated with the faint rhythm of that buried heartbeat. But the visitors, the Elios, had returned. They stood in the same place as before, motionless and transparent, as if light itself had chosen to take form. I understood that they were not here to study the anomaly, but to explain its origin. They told us the truth did not belong to our planet. The structure beneath Stonehenge was a remnant of a conflict so old that even their own records spoke of it in myth. They said their ancestors had fought a species called the Draxians, predators of consciousness, who engineered living weapons capable of copying and consuming all biological life. These creatures were not machines nor organisms. but a fusion of both, evolving endlessly, dividing without limit, feeding on light, memory, and motion. The Ilios had captured one of them in a final act of desperation and sealed it inside a metallic prison, a construct forged from zirconium, a metal born in the heart of dying stars. It was meant to last forever, but forever was not as long as they believed. The Draxians lost the war, but their creations were scattered across distant worlds, hidden in places where no civilization would dare to dig. The Ilios had erased all coordinates to prevent rediscovery, even from themselves. Yet one location escaped their memory: Earth. They said humanity's drilling, our seismic frequencies and magnetoacoustic tools had reactivated a dormant signature. The signal we captured was not an echo from the ground. It was a beacon, a call that both sides had felt across galaxies. I realized then that our science had served as a key. What we believed to be research had opened a forgotten lock. The Ilios told us they had detected the same pulse from their observation posts and followed it here to contain what was waking. The Draxians, they warned, had felt it too. Somewhere in the void, their surviving fleets had begun to move. Two ancient enemies were converging again, drawn toward the same point, a prehistoric battlefield disguised as one of Earth's greatest mysteries. Around us, the instruments began to behave strangely. Magnetic fields folded into spirals, and radio waves bent into patterns that resembled language. The Ilios said the entity below was already aware of our presence, sensing every vibration we made. It recognized the return of its creators. It recognized us as well. Night fell, and the sky above Stonehenge glowed with faint lines of green light, auroras that should not have existed at that latitude. The Ilios said the awakening had begun. I understood that their arrival was not salvation, but containment. They had not come to save Earth, but to prevent what slept beneath it from becoming aware that the universe still existed. The thought settled like ice. Humanity had stumbled into a war millions of years old, fought between beings whose memory shaped the laws of matter. The ground beneath Stonehenge no longer felt stable. It seemed to breathe through us, synchronizing with every heartbeat in the camp. I looked at the monitors and saw the pulse strengthen. Slower now, heavier, deliberate. Something enormous and patient was listening. The Ilios said we had little time. The Draxians were already on their way. And the thing beneath our feet, the one their ancestors had buried, was beginning to remember itself. We were the first living beings to touch that metal in millennia. And something, somewhere, had felt it. They said Stonehenge was never a monument. It was a mechanism. The stones were not placed to mark celestial events, but to sustain a dormant lock hidden beneath the soil. Every pillar, every lintel, was part of an ancient system connected to the planet's magnetic grid. The Ilios explained that when aligned with solar cycles, these megaliths resonated, channeling energy downward, keeping the prison below sealed. I understood then that we were standing on a structure designed not for worship, but for containment. Together, we studied the data, and Sophia, the archaeologist, decoded the geometric inscriptions embedded in the rock. She said the symbols were not primitive. They were coordinates and resonance keys, arranged like a circuit board carved into stone. The frequencies matched the electromagnetic anomalies we had recorded. When the stones aligned, they would activate a lift, a massive energy column capable of raising the buried structure to the surface. The Ilios said they needed to bring the prison upward to destroy it under direct solar radiation. Only the concentrated energy of a star could break the zirconium shell and erase the organism inside. They told us the process had to be precise. If the resonance drifted, the system could reverse itself, opening the containment instead of stabilizing it. I remember feeling the ground vibrate beneath my feet as they began their calibration. The magnetic field across Salisbury Plain twisted and folded like a living current. Every compass spun uncontrollably. The stones themselves began to hum, low at first, then stronger. A sound older than speech, deep and hollow, spreading across the landscape like an invisible wave. The Ilios worked in silence. Their instruments projected narrow beams of light between the monoliths, connecting them into a vast geometric pattern. The lines shimmered in the night like veins of a colossal organism waking from sleep. I could feel the vibration through my bones. Beneath us, the buried structure answered, a distant tremor, followed by the rising pitch of resonance. The stones rotated, slowly, impossibly, grinding through the soil. Dust lifted into the air, as if gravity had weakened. They said the system was reacting faster than it should. The energy output exceeded all projections. Then the first rumble came from below, deep, slow, not seismic, but alive. A pulse of light erupted from the excavation pit, white and blinding. The ground convulsed as the hidden mechanism began to move. The soil cracked, and through the fissures, I saw glimmers of metal reflecting the sky. The earth opened like a wound. A massive circular structure began to rise, the prison of Zeranium. It ascended through layers of rock, displacing centuries of silence. Its surface glowed faintly blue, covered with flowing veins of light that pulsed like capillaries beneath transparent skin. The entire plain shook as the monolith reached the surface, towering above the ruins of Stonehenge. The original stones toppled, shattered, and scattered around its base. When the tremors ceased, a perfect stillness followed. The monolith stood silent, smooth and glimmering with internal motion. Then a crack appeared at its summit, a narrow slit of white light, widening slowly, as if something within it was breathing. The Ilios said the core had sensed us. I felt it too, a low vibration echoing inside my skull, like the beginning of a thought that wasn't mine. We entered the structure. Inside was a vast chamber with walls that mirrored light, as if made of liquid glass. The air shimmered and trembled, vibrating with faint, soundless rhythm. At the center stood a transparent capsule. Within it, suspended in pale luminescence, was a figure, 4 meters tall, skeletal and white, with elongated limbs and vast eyes without pupils. The body looked weightless, wrapped in a thin membrane of light. It did not breathe. It simply existed, patient and complete. They said the capsule could open only from the inside. Then the vibration deepened. The Zeranium walls began to fracture. Above us, the night sky turned dark as 3 cubic silhouettes appeared in orbit, massive, silent, devouring the starlight. We had not lifted a prison. We had unlocked a door. When the stones began to move, I understood that Stonehenge had never been a monument of peace, but a lid. The air vibrated, as if the planet itself had remembered an ancient wound. Dust rose from the fractured soil, covering the light of dawn with a thin gray mist. Beneath us, the monolith groaned, the Zeranium shell flexing like a living muscle. The Ilios said the structure had entered a state of magnetic inversion. The energy we had unleashed was reversing its polarity. What was meant to hold the core sealed was now feeding it instead. The ground rippled under our feet. Sensors failed one after another. Waves of heat rose through the fissures, bending the air like glass. I looked at the monolith, and its veins of light began to flicker, from cold blue to red, then to white, each pulse faster than the last. The hum that had once been steady turned into a roar, deep and resonant, as if the world beneath us was breathing for the first time in ages. The Ilios moved quickly, trying to restore balance. They said the containment field was collapsing. Their instruments projected arcs of light, weaving symbols across the surface of the monolith, but the pattern broke apart like ice under pressure. The sound of cracking metal rolled through the valley, a slow tearing, like mountains splitting open. The vibration reached our bones. I felt my heartbeat align with it. The synchronization was perfect, terrifyingly natural, as though the thing below was using us as its rhythm. Then the first rupture appeared. A thin fracture ran across the zirconium shell, glowing from within. Through the crack, I saw movement. Not mechanical, but organic, fluid, deliberate. Something vast and pale pressed against the inner walls, deforming them with its pulse. The Elios said the entity was stirring, responding to the energy around it. They warned that once awakened, it would no longer need the prison to survive. The walls began to bulge outward. The temperature spiked. Instruments ignited. The soil itself seemed to liquefy. The air filled with a low-frequency vibration that bypassed sound entirely. It struck directly through the body, shaking blood, bone, and thought. I felt consciousness blur at the edges. The Elios said the awakening had triggered a planetary resonance field. Stonehenge was no longer just a site. It had become an antenna, transmitting the entity's pulse into the sky. When I raised my eyes, the stars were gone. The night had turned into a dense, lightless void. Then I saw them. 3 enormous cubes drifting silently through the upper atmosphere. They absorbed all reflection, casting no shadow. Their movement defied gravity, precise and mathematical. The Elios said the Draxions had arrived. The creatures that had created the prison now sought to reclaim what was inside. The cubes hung above the monolith like omens, geometric and eternal, their surfaces rippling with dark energy. The Elios tried to form a barrier. Their ships descended, silver discs, emitting thin, transparent waves of light. The sky divided into 2 geometries, circles and cubes, fluid against rigid, order against consumption. I understood then that this was not an invasion, but a return, the continuation of a war older than humanity itself. The Draxions did not come to conquer. They came to awaken their lost weapon. The monolith cracked further, the sound echoing like thunder through the valley. From the fissures burst clouds of radiant dust, fragments of zirconium scattering like meteors. I felt the vibration rise through my spine and settle behind my eyes. A silent command, ancient and absolute. The Elios said it was broadcasting now, reaching for something beyond the atmosphere. The hum deepened into silence. Then the ground exhaled. A burst of light erupted upward, and I saw, for the briefest moment, a shape moving inside the shell. Tall, skeletal, and bright. The planet itself seemed to hold its breath. We had not raised a relic. We had unleashed a signal. When the cubes entered the atmosphere, the sky turned black. It was not night, but an erasure of light itself. Clouds dissolved into geometric shadows, and the air began to hum with a frequency that felt alive. The Draxion vessels descended slowly, almost weightlessly, their surfaces absorbing radiation and color. The Elios said the cubes were not ships, but living structures, fragments of an ancient mind, returning to reclaim what had been buried. Above the ruined plain, silver discs of the Elios rose to meet them. The contrast was unreal, perfect circles shimmering against massive silent cubes that swallowed stars. The battle began without sound. No fire, no explosions, only waves of pressure that bent the horizon. Each time the fields collided, the sky rippled like liquid metal. I felt the tremors through the ground, through the bones, through the air itself. The Elios said their only hope was to channel all remaining energy into the monolith before the Draxions reached it. But the monolith was already awake. Beneath us, the zirconium prison glowed from within. veins of white light spreading across its surface like cracks in ice. I heard a deep, rhythmic pulse coming from the core. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The entity was moving. The Ilios tried to stabilize it, but every counterfield only strengthened the reaction. Then the metal split. The noise was not a sound, but a pressure that flattened thought. From the fracture rose a column of white luminescence, and within it a shape unfolded. Tall, skeletal, its surface smooth and pale as bone. It had no mouth, no face, only two enormous black eyes that reflected everything. The Ilios said it should not have been able to move, but it moved. Slowly at first, then fluidly, as if remembering a forgotten language of motion. Its limbs extended like strands of living light. Each time it shifted, the air changed density. Around it, the ground began to shimmer, and I realized it was multiplying. 1 became 2. 2 became 5. Each new body was smaller, denser, faster. They shared one pulse, one rhythm, one awareness. The soil turned translucent beneath their feet, feeding them energy drawn from the planet itself. The cubes above descended lower, aligning perfectly with the entity's glow. The Ilios said the Draxians were linking, transmitting control through resonance. The creatures below responded, raising their heads toward the sky, their eyes reflecting the shapes of the cubes. The connection completed like a circuit. A single beam of darkness extended from the central cube to the ground. When it touched the monolith, the light inverted. The world became negative. White shadows, black fire, silence louder than sound. The Ilios acted instantly. Their ships converged in a spiral around the prison, releasing streams of radiant plasma. The light expanded, cutting through the darkness. I felt the heat against my face, even from hundreds of meters away. The ground quaked, tearing fissures across the plain. For a moment, it seemed the Ilios were winning. The cubes recoiled, folding their edges inward. But the entities below absorbed the energy, growing brighter, more defined. They were feeding on the attack. The Ilios said there was only one option left: convergence. They began aligning their ships into a pattern above the monolith, merging their power sources into a single field. The light around them condensed into a sphere of burning blue. I saw their forms begin to disintegrate, their bodies dissolving into the beam. The field expanded, collapsing inward, then released all stored energy in one pulse. The blast erased everything. Stonehenge disappeared in the glare. The earth convulsed, swallowing its own shadow. For a moment, the entire horizon became white. Not light, but absence. Then silence. The cubes vanished. The sky cleared. When I regained consciousness, the air was gray and still. The ground was cracked and smoking, but beneath the silence I could hear something faint. A slow, steady rhythm pulsing under the soil. It was not mechanical. It was breathing. We believed the world had survived, but the ground beneath us was alive. We survived, but the world was gone. The horizon was a plain of ash, a silence so heavy it felt sculpted. The air carried a metallic scent. The aftermath of light itself burned away. I saw fragments of ships scattered like bones across the blackened soil. The Ilios were gone, erased, dissolved in the storm they had created. Only a few of us remained: Sophia, Lance, and I, standing in the hollow shadow of what had been Stonehenge. The monolith was no longer visible, but something beneath the ground still moved, slowly, rhythmically, like a buried lung drawing breath through stone. We wandered through the ruins. Every step sent small clouds of white dust spiraling into the air. The land felt hollow, as though it had lost its weight. Instruments picked up faint energy signatures, but they came not from the sky or from the debris. They came from below. The soil pulsed softly, emitting warmth. I realized then that the energy blast had not destroyed the entity. It had forced it deeper, fusing it with the crust of the earth. The heartbeat of the planet was no longer its own. Sophia said the electromagnetic field was fluctuating unnaturally. I could see it too. Thin waves of distortion trembling above the ground like mirages. Lance found what was left of an Ilios device, half buried in the dust. A crystalline fragment still faintly glowing. It emitted a pulse that resonated in my chest. I felt drawn to it, as if it were calling my name, but in a language made of pressure and light. The fragment held power, not enough to rebuild, but enough to resist. We followed the readings toward the center of the crater where the monolith had stood. The ground there was cracked, and the air shimmered faintly blue. Something beneath was still alive. I felt the pulse growing stronger, and the rhythm of it matched the beating of my heart. For a moment, I thought I heard it. Not a voice, not thought, but recognition. It remembered us. The soil erupted. A tremor rippled outward, knocking us to the ground. Fragments of glass and stone flew into the air as a blinding light burst through the fissures. Through the glare, I saw shapes moving under the surface, thin, translucent, crawling upward. They were smaller now, embryonic forms of what had awakened before. Each one shimmered faintly, reflecting the gray daylight like molten silver. They were multiplying again. Panic overtook logic. We ran, stumbling through the wasteland, but the ground shifted with each step, soft and alive. The creatures did not pursue. They were spreading, dividing, embedding themselves deeper. The Ilios had sacrificed everything, but the organism had adapted. It was no longer one being. It had become part of the earth itself. At the edge of the ruins, I activated the Ilios fragment. A flash of pale blue light erupted from my hands, forming a wave that carved through the dust. For a moment, the ground stilled. The tremors ceased, the hum vanished, and the pulse beneath my feet grew faint. The fragment dimmed, turning cold and colorless. I knew it was temporary. We had delayed, not stopped, what was coming. The sun broke through the haze for the first time. The sky was colorless, washed of all contrast. I looked toward the crater and saw faint motion under the thin layer of ash. The same slow breathing I had felt before. It would not stop. It was patient. It had learned to wait again. When night came, lights appeared on the horizon. Not from ships, not from fire. Human vehicles, moving silently across the wasteland. They were black, unmarked, methodical. They came for us. We had survived the battle, but the earth beneath our feet had not. They arrived before dawn. No insignias, no flags, no sound of engines. Only the soft rumble of tires pressing through the ash. The vehicles were matte black, sealed, identical. Men and women in dark suits stepped out, moving with quiet precision. Their masks hid every trace of expression. They said nothing to us, only gestured to stay still. I realized then that they had been waiting, not for survivors, but for silence. They called themselves Foreign Memory. I heard the name in passing. A label whispered through radio static as they established perimeter grids. They moved like surgeons, not soldiers. Every step, every motion had purpose. They began by isolating the crater, deploying translucent barriers that flickered with faint blue light. Machines the size of coffins were lowered into the ground, releasing a hum that made the air itself feel heavy. I asked what they were doing, but no one answered. One of them turned briefly toward me and said only that contamination must be contained: physical, informational, and cognitive. They collected the fragments of Ilios technology, sealing them inside leaded containers. Drones swept the area, erasing tracks, removing debris, dissolving ash. What remained of the monolith was pulverized into fine dust and buried beneath new layers of soil. Within hours, the plane began to resemble what it had been before. Empty, unremarkable, harmless. They said all visible traces would be gone by sunset. We were separated. Sophia was taken to a tent lined with monitors. Lance disappeared into one of the vehicles. I was left alone with a field operative who carried no weapon, only a small black case. He opened it, revealing a silver device that emitted a faint pulse of light. He said it was a cognitive stabilizer, a procedure to remove residual exposure. I understood the meaning behind the words. They were not cleansing us of radiation, but of memory. When they began, I felt a surge of cold at the base of my skull, followed by a white flash that erased thought for an instant. I remembered fragments, the hum of energy, the sound of breathing soil, the shadow of the cubes. But they dissolved quickly, like fog in sunlight. The world became simple again, smaller. I was told that there had been a gas explosion at the dig site, that my colleagues were being treated elsewhere. I nodded, though even as I said yes, I felt something resisting inside, a fragment that refused to vanish. Days later, I was released. Stonehenge stood untouched, the grass unburned, the stones upright. Tourists walked between them as if nothing had ever happened. The wind was calm, the soil quiet. The official reports mentioned no anomaly, no incident, no survivors beyond standard evacuation. Foreign memory had erased everything, not only from minds, but from history. And yet, at night, I returned to the field alone. The plane was cold, the air clean. I placed my hand on the ground where the crater had been, and I felt it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but real. A rhythm, deep and slow, like the pulse of something sleeping far beneath. They had restored the world. They had erased the witnesses. But the ground still breathed. File 72, classified by foreign memory. Subject, Stonehenge incident. Status, contained. They erased everyone's memory. Everyone except mine.